So I want to start with these memes that I have been working on. Just to begin to talk about art production. And punishing humor. I guess I was introduced to the meme format by Sven, maybe like, I don't know, half a year ago or something. So when I first encountered them, I thought there was like this really intelligent computer that somehow knew, like, understood how we all thought way better than we'd ever been able to, and was like producing abstract language that somehow, like, I don't know, was able to produce like not just like humor, but a kind of like subversive humor or something. So when I discovered that people actually made them, I became interested in making them as well.
It's showing on the computer website and then check for it.
Knock out, but
This is the first one. I mean, I guess, I don't know if I really like want to explain them so deeply. I want you to like experience them, but the joke was sort of to like rename Soho or NoHo or Tribeca de la Croix. And as like a neighborhood where the pregnant moment of painting was like sort of visible everywhere. And I took this photo after seeing art shows in the Lower East Side, and it seemed so like, I don't know, I guess I wasn't really thinking about it when I took it, but I could sense that there was this like pregnant moment happening in this bus station. And then I cropped the photo and it was, yeah, I don't know, reminded me of painting. So, this is a misuse of vomitorium. I mean, I'm like partially educated off of Mel Brooks movies, so I intended vomitorium to be read as like a site in which people are vomiting, when in actuality it isn't that. So I wanted to compare the process of creating art as being like that of utilizing a vomitorium, and you would have to hope that your belly contains the right mixture of ingredients to make you want to go through all the trouble of sticking your finger down your throat and retching. Otherwise, it's for naught. And this is a pretty popular meme image by Joseph DeCreux, but it's often paired with rap lyrics translated into like Old English. This is another, I was in Duane Reade, and they had this like row of children's toys and blankets, and I saw this blanket that had like folded over in a way that it had become an image, like it had become, I don't know, it wasn't what it was originally intended to be perceived as. It was sort of this image of like a very vulnerable, sad thing, so I wanted to relate it in a kind of don't know, almost a self-mocking way to the experience of looking at art and having an emotional reaction. So this is the pod scene from The Matrix. It's when he breaks out of the pod and he looks around and everyone looks like him and he realizes he's been trapped in this thing his whole life, and now he's sort of coming to terms with what's real. And I made this meme in response to a group that I'm a part of online on Facebook that's like all female network of some kind, and we discuss art-related things, and I'm just sort of tired of like hearing this like discussion of like the all-female, like if you do an art show with like all women artists, it's a ghetto, because to me the entire history is a ghetto. So I just told them that if someone wanted to have this kind of discussion with them, they could just show them this meme. Again, with performance and painting, I mean, I think a lot of people now, there's this like play happening between performance and painting, and a lot of it is, it's weird. I feel like I see a lot of painting getting legitimized by like invoking the practice of performance, and then somehow performance practices utilizing painting to like almost like fund the performance or something, because it's more I don't know, it enters the market. And I found this image of these like stacks of money, so I wanted to make a meme about this like weird play going on between performance and painting. And I like bringing part of the accumulation of things when I can. And then I made another one. That's it. Yeah. I made a meme of the title of the exhibition in my name. So yeah, I guess you guys feel free to like step in if you want to. I guess we'll just sort of discuss some of the works from the show, and then I don't know, I had this impulse to like almost assign these sort of like reference images to them, but you can sort of take them seriously or not, or discredit them entirely. But this painting I titled Heidiland, and to me, I mean, when I was like beginning to think about what this painting was, I realized that it was a sort of reaction to like generalizations of an entire subculture. And then when that sort of became clear, I realized that a lot of my work is that kind of reaction. And then also historically, you know, I think these like, I'm really like interested in using feminine indicators. I don't really know why. I just like, with this painting, I guess I think a lot of like historical material, so I was thinking like a woman at her toilet, or, you know, like repairing her hair or something, as like the precedent for like, you know, this reaction that I was having as like the painting. And then also we have like a Harajuku girl and a raver. And these are all kind of exotic things to me too, so. Heidiland is a place, as I discovered on my site visit to Kunsthalle, Zürich. And I think I'm also very much drawn to like these like images of excess, because they occur between, I think, these like different things that I look to, like bohemianism and like rave culture, like these related subcultures, and maybe it even relates again to like performance and painting. I was at this residency, and they staged what was called, I mean, it was a performance, it was MDMA Safari, and they ordered MDMA from silkroad.com and created these paintings. Yeah, it wasn't like MDMA on campus, it was, yeah. Yeah.
We were talking, I don't know, something might work. Sort of, oh, there we go. We were talking about your use of the subculture and subcultural references as they'll kind of unfold over the course of the talk, but how there was a surprising, in preparing for this talk, resonance between your own project and Isabel's really powerful definition of painting as a sign system where there's an expectation of highly personal signs. And I was wondering if you could speak to the way subcultures where signs are always only so personalized. They're generally kept kind of open, and if you think that that's been part of why subcultures have been a foil for so many of your paintings.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like you sort of, if you're not a part of the subculture, you only identify it through like specific things, and since I make figurative painting, the thing for me was going to be like these accessories, so they sort of denote like culture, like cultural mythologies and history, and also like the history of like practice of painting. So, but I mean, painting is like a very suggestive space to me. So I always think of like when I'm constructing a painting, it's like building it, which is maybe why it's really easy, or it's more natural for me to use like a tool on the computer where I'm like building things, I'm like adding and than like preparing like actual sketches by hand or like making the work.
It's also really funny. I mean, a pacifier sort of says more about how much a person is likely to have access to MDMA or would like to share some with you if you have some, than kind of the subtlest facial expression ever could. And I don't know. I think that's I don't know. It shows up again and again in your paintings as these schematics. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that there's something that becomes so specific that everything is somehow so general in the painting, and that you really feel like you do know this person, even though it is completely like a generalized person. But I was wondering if there's something specific about rave cultures, like as opposed to all other subcultures, that is something that you find particularly like you want to deal with.
Yeah, I think it really has to, because it's so related to like like this thing of artistic excess with sort of like chemicals and like long bouts of like engaging in one kind of activity, whether it's like with other people or in the privacy of your own studio, or I don't know.
It's also weirdly inner compared to, I think, other subcultures. We were talking about this at the dinner, like going to raves and having the experience of like everyone's just watching their hands or something, you know, like they're together dancing alone, you know, and I think there's like this thing that's the kind of strange to be like at a rave and not really be quite a raver. Like you can practice your dancing, but not really feel like you're being watched, you know. But I think it's also true with this painting that there's something about her where she feels like, despite being in her own world, she's an extra in her own world. She feels like she's like in the bathroom at a rave or something, having a moment with herself or something, or like trying to reorganize herself to go back out into the party or something.
So this is like, I had to ask someone like what this was called. This is called picture in picture. And I like began using it in my work without really knowing what it was. But now I know. So this is anxiety painting. This is also in the exhibition. I don't know, I guess for me, like this picture-in-picture thing is sort of like a primitive, like, it's like a digital conflation of the eye in the spotlight. And it's like a tool for me to like highlight things and then be like, I guess I became somewhat disinterested in like, just like a scene, like this, again, like this idea of the suggestiveness of like the picture. Was like something that I thought I could play with like echoing these sort of like video effects or something, and then the tool that I'm using to actually make the images blurry by nature, so I can like blur things and I can think of things like a photographer or a filmmaker or whatever. You know, I can make depth of field in painting, which is like, I can't really think of like, I couldn't think of places where I had seen that, so that became very exciting for me, like the act of, like portraying the act of viewing through the lens or something. I mean, that's so historical to like painting, which is like for hundreds of years relied on like lenses in like darkened rooms to like project images and construct like narrative scenarios and whatnot. But I guess it was like this kind of vision, like this more like contemporary kind of like the lens of the video camera or the video editor was like just something that seemed like unfamiliar territory, and I think that's why I've been employing it with this work.
I think there's something really sweet in this image that we talked about before, where she's such a almost kind of kitsch manifestation of despair and anxiety. Like she could have stepped in from a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor commercial. And yeah, when you were talking about it, you described this really profound definition of anxiety, or
Yeah,
as it relates to the artistic process.
I forgot. Okay, this is embarrassing, but it's Sartre or Nietzsche who basically like defined like that the philosophical mood was one of like, you feel completely alienated by fear, like fear that your own existence essentially is meaningless. And I think that's what you're asking me about?
Yeah.
Okay.
Fear, right,
Fear of
like
death,
the
fear-
state of being enthralled to the fear of death was the best time to be a philosopher.
That was like when, that was it was like a philosophical state or like condition. And it's also like an emotional one, it's not analytical. So like that actually surprised me that like a philosopher would make that argument.
Anyway. No, I just thought that was a beautiful thing to think about for this thing.
Yeah. I mean, also like anxiety is like an overprescribed condition. I mean, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it does definitely have this feeling of an ad. Like it's something that you could see off of the highway, like where to call, like do you need help or something. I was curious too about the badness of these things too, the kind of the pop-ups, the picture within a picture, and also the kind of super blockiness of the SketchUp that kind of has this like early computer rendering look to it, like the very crudeness of it. I think there's something about those pop-ups that kind of remind me also of those like infomercials from the 80s or something, or you would see things like Tim and Eric use it a lot or something. You also see something kind of related to the scene, but it informs it. It's like it somehow seemed like the height of technology at the time, but it somehow now seems kind of
It's like very dated.
yeah, it's very dated or something. But I think that the way that it has this doubleness because it's sort of like something that seems like it could be a pop-up in a computer, like a
So like even this like almost belongs to the time period in which like this stylization of the figure would have been conceived. Or something.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Like it does, like, you know, like you see those ads on the subway for like that Dr. Zismore, the acne man. You know, like it has those kind of, you'll see pop like kind of little vignettes of before and afters of people used him.
Yeah. Yeah, also like after I had made this painting, I suddenly like realized like where the image had come from. Like I remember seeing someone in this pose during like what was like a very awful day in my life. And he was like completely covered in gray dust from the World Trade Center, and he was like sitting on the steps of my school, which I was being evacuated from. And I'll never forget like the image of this man in a suit and with a briefcase like completely like one tone and like dusty, and he was making this exact expression. I totally I was like, oh, I've unconsciously embedded this image in my like own image, like it's like present, like this life experience is present in my mind somehow.
It's interesting because I started thinking about like how, and lots of them talked about the amateur or the badness, or like you're talking about the cliche of the gesture, or the situation, or the cliche of the idea of an artist, and actually I was wondering if there's something about these, for me, like the reason why I think sometimes they're funny is because you can recognize the truth in some of them too. Like there's always a moment, even like where you could be doing something and you feel like, oh my God, like the sad woman sitting in the corner in the room, where if you find yourself sad sitting in a corner, you're like, oh my God, I'm like a sad girl sitting in the corner. but I was wondering, for you as an artist, do you have that relationship to it? Do you feel like that it's all a cliche for you, or do you feel that there's actually moments of realness there, or something that could be, despite the understanding of it?
I kind of like to think that there's like lots of different attitudes, and they occur whether or not I'm even conscious of them or aware of them. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, because that painting was more about, I guess, like sometimes the title, like the paintings are all about subjecthood, like what is the status and position of this subject. And with that painting, with the title, I wanted to imply that you, the viewer, are a subject. Because it implies the way you would be reading it into it. We'll get to that painting later. But yeah.
You want to ask a question, or only at the end? Or is this always? Okay.
I made this meme about the Kunsthalle. I saw a spider during my site visit, and it was very remarkable to me in this building. And I guess as like a visual transition to this next work, director, which I kind of conceived as almost this like phenomenological painting where you begin to present the viewer with this idea that awareness itself is like an internal model constructed by the brain, and like I wanted to do it like show that to you visually by having like a hand holding a viewing device that's like too close to your eyes, and so it's out of focus, but then like through it you're having this like, you're being presented with this beautiful image or something, and I mean, this figure that recurs is a bit of an idiot because it's an adult playing a child's instrument. So I guess it ties into the embarrassing performance aspect that I think I commonly rally around. And then you can see that there's like a third layer of space. So there's this far off figure who like this could be like a tripod leg or something. They're facing it, like are they, like shooting film, or like are they making a painting on an easel? But it gets sort of like limited by the sort of like dumb reality of like the person's own gesture, like obscuring and elucidating something at the same time.
This is such a strange painting for me. This is when I never knew that that was actually a hand holding it. It's like so abstract of a painting is structured, but also that kind of blurry, hard-edged hand. Like that's really good. But
Yeah, I saw you do that with some of your paintings, like you had like the hand reaching to the guy's eye.
yeah, but
I had not made that connection with your work too, that you have that like layer where like the person can like almost impose their own experience as like the actual plane of like where the image begins.
well, I think there's something that you can have with the subject, where the subject itself can have a kind of awareness of itself being pictured. So it's kind of in there, but it's in there for the picture. And I think your work really does that a lot, like that it, like whether it's there on stage, but but I think it's also inherent in the posture of the subjects, like a kind of self-consciousness that's there. Like her, I mean, although she is on stage, there's something you really know just about that, her kind of hunch of her back, the angle that you're looking down at her from. But I think that's always a kind of interesting thing where you can, like the painting itself can be slightly aware of its position as something that's looked at, but then still go on with its thing that it wants to do. I think that's really common in the studio visit one, which I think is really an amazing painting, actually for its realism, in this way where you kind of feel like you know who is the artist, definitely, because of the uncomfortable, like the artist wouldn't put her bottle on the floor, like that's so much of the visitor would put these little details like that, like they're kind of not quite engaging with the situation, you know, and also just the posture, like the visitor is kind of very closed off. Like he's not at home in space, he has to think of what he has to say there or something. But I think it's really remarkable that you're able to get at all these things, and it's, you know, sort of goes I think to me it kind of goes beyond this idea of cliche. Like I think it gets to something that's very specific, you know. It's, at least with that painting for sure. But it's like, it's a kind of specific experience that you can laugh at, but that's also kind of sometimes necessary or desired, or, you know, it's like all of these things at once, I think.
Thanks. I mean, I guess I'm always like thinking that, you know, like painting is like historicizing whatever's like there. So like the studio visit painting was about like you know, it was like every little detail and like nuance of like discomfort, like should be present. It's, you know, because it's not like glorifying,
Right.
like the interaction.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess also like I'd never had a so-called professional studio visit when I did that painting. So it was like a projection, I guess, as to like what that would be like, you know. I'd only had friends in my studio. Oh yeah, so this is a Maurizio Catalan. I don't know, I just saw it on the Silverman's website, but it does a similar, I was like, oh, a similar lens effect. This isn't an Atkins still. I mean, spatially this is like layered, it doesn't make, you know, you don't like, it's not like a natural space being depicted as like here, or as I tried to here.
It's also this thing of the thing that messes up the picture. Like when your hand messes up the picture, when you take the photo and your thumb's in it, and you're like, damn it, there's this blurry thing in the way. But that painting has that feeling, like there's this blurry thing in the way. I feel like I don't know exactly what it was until you put it with the hand. I really like that agitation in the way it's structured.
This is, so I visited Turin digitally, knowing that the show was going to travel there, and you know, Google Maps is kind of great for that. actually explored my old neighborhood because it was too scary to walk around alone. So I toured it on Google Maps once, but while touring Turin, I discovered the shadow of the camera of the Google map making van or whatever it is, and director. So yeah, this, again, I guess I've, European ego ideal, also in the exhibition.
Amazing. Amazingly vexing title.
I don't know, I think there's something about like self-representation and the ideal self and like projections of the self, and also like all this like exotic, like the way I exoticize Europe, especially in my work, that I wanted to like project all of these like this idea that there's like 5 ego ideals or something present here, and you access them visually through these vignettes, but this Milton Avery painting of a woman with hat was like, this is like, again, with this idea of like the suggestive artwork, like this is one of the most suggestive paintings I can think of. It's just you're presented with like absurdity and like vulnerability and like just enough, and like a very specific hat, but then also a very non-specific hat, because there's no detail. So, and I've actually used this hat before, and I hadn't really thought much about it. I didn't describe anything. I mean, at first, actually, I'd used it as like a Hasidic fedora. And then that's sort of how I invented this hair, was like the payas of the Hasidic man and Jewish artist and patron. But yeah, I think this painting was probably one of the main inspirations for this painting. Also named after this person, or this artist. Again, with like the historical practice of like cropping images, like as though they were seen through a lens. This is one of my favorite artworks, The Turkish Bath by Ang. Every figure in here is like, could be its own painting, and it would be an incredible painting. I don't know, I also think he was a very radical painter for his time. Another meme that I made out of an image that someone had sent me. They were excited because they thought my art looked like their friend's art, and this was their friend's art. And I really like this hashtag that people use, current mood, because you could just sort of apply it to anything. Like if I applied this hashtag to the Google Maps photo, like this is current mood painting.
Immediately historicizes it.
Yeah.
This is Gertie McDowell's playbook. I sort of began like thinking of these two like metaphors for male masturbation in art and literature. So I had, the seabed, obviously, and the Gertie McDowell Nausicaa chapter from Ulysses, where they have like it's like the chapter that had the book banned. But it's like a sexual encounter between the teenager, Gertie McDowell, and Leo Bloom on the beach. And the rhythm of the writing mirrors the rhythm of the masturbatory activity. So I thought it would be funny if it was a painting where like artists investigate and like can do it dumbly. So this is sort of, I don't know, I guess I sort of thought of this scenario as like there's these two artists dumbly conflating like metaphor and historical precedents.
It's It's interesting that they're both kind of going through the motions. Like she's so clearly on, like they're both looking at the viewer, which I think is hard to, it means that he can't be quite masturbating to her, you know? Like he's looking at the viewer and then, but it's like the gesture of masturbating. And with her, it's like, she looks so much like one of those models like in life drawing, like where you're just aware of how much time she has to hold the pose, you know? Like, she's starting to shake.
Yeah, and this lighting effect that I was using for a while, I just kind of wanted it to look like this provisional, like theatrical setup where, you know, like there's like a spotlight and then you just sort of like cut out all these shapes and like apply it over the light source. And it's like a completely opaque paper, so the light coming through like mirrors all the shapes that they would have made on it. So it's a kind of playful gesture where like there really is like no kind of like playful activity that happens in the making of this work, and like I feel like playfulness is so inherent to the medium. Also because you're able to like see the time in which decisions were made and like taken and the process of the making, and that's like totally gone from here until you get to the background. So I have seedbed, and then there was a second like restaging of seedbed, and in my time spent watching videos on the internet, I discovered that it's, you know, like 5 times as interesting to watch a man crash his own car into Crown Fried Chicken, strip naked, and pleasure himself, not safe for work. And it is in President Obama's State of the Union address. This is a living theater performance. I just really like I think it's like the scale and like the size of the people and the provisional nature of the stage, but I think it's like a really beautiful stage. This is sad woman projecting libidinal thoughts. Any questions? I guess I mentioned it.
Well, we've talked about this as a painting that's where the title supplies almost all of the content, except for the woman, I guess. And the topic of projection in any number of different forms keeps coming up in these paintings, whether it's the use of the actual projector or the figurative language that makes the people you paint kind of like ciphers that one projects their own emotions into. And I just wonder if you could speak to the idea of the model actually like this, like your relationship to this fantasy of the model's own subjectivity actually coming out of the painting towards the viewer, and how that is brought up short or is activated or questioned in this picture.
I guess I feel that like because there's no subjective experience to be had in the process in which you perceive that the painting is made, that desire to view into subjectivity gets displaced, and I'm not exactly sure where it goes.
See, I have this issue. I don't believe that just because you don't have supposedly Thatcher, that is, you know, that there is no subjectivity there. I mean, I think these paintings definitely, they have a surface, they have a quality to them, and they have a kind of way that they're constructed and made, you know. And that's funny, this idea of subjectivity, like what is super subjective and what is somehow doesn't have it or something. I think that everything has a kind of subjectivity, you know, to it. I think the thing that's interesting about this is that it's sort of, it's such a high school subject in a way. Like this, it's like the kind of subject that a high schooler would probably make, you know, like the person in the corner crouching. But the way that it's done is somehow, it seems very cool or calculated or something like that. But I don't know. I'm sorry. Do you really see it as like something that is devoid of your subjectivity?
I just think there's like this very specific relationship with viewing painting, in that you can see the manner in which it was like the entire image was made, and you get a feeling of like not just like the bodily presence of that artist that made those marks, but like the mind that decided to employ the hand in that way. And this is like a layer of subjectivity that we explore when we are actively viewing a painting.
But do you feel that you get something like, not, I mean, everything is different. Every way that you look at it, like a mark is different. But that you can get something like this by you looking at how the tape is used, or that there's like this kind of this other mark making of how you're choosing to use this. I mean, it's hard because you can say, okay, tape is a sort of ready-made edge or whatever, but I think, I don't know, everything has a kind of particular surface to it too.
Yeah, I guess there is this like aura of like, I don't know, being able to discern like the activity of like the production or something. But it is like still like very much obscured. I don't know. I mean, it's like I get a lot of this sort of like, it's like, what is it? You know, and like materially, what is it? That's like everyone's first question, like they don't understand. So I feel like if they have that question, there's some nature of experience and viewing that must, I don't know, it must just be displaced somewhere. So if it's displaced, as like what you were saying, like in like the projection of the ideas of like the figure or something, like I think that's,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, yeah, because I don't think, it's on some very basic level, it's probably not possible to paint something and not have some amount of affect be transmitted or whatever, but there's specifically like a zone of content in this painting is making sure that the title does as much work as it can in terms of determining and guiding the viewer's affect, and that where it does, the viewer's affective response to it, and that where it does occur in the painting, it's sort of like, I don't know, like, does this woman feel more libidinal than the other women in your paintings because her like vagina is actually like 2.5 times as big? I didn't mean to think that, but I can't not think it because it's so well titled. That's sort of what I think.
So it sort of like signals to like a kind of obvious or like even dumb cue somehow, or I'm not so much concerned with the cue is like visually dumb or not. I just think it's like as a way for the picture to operate, like when you do title paintings, and we've talked about this, a lot of the paintings remain untitled because they don't have an appropriate title. So when you do title paintings, it seems like you work really hard at instrumentalizing the title in order to supply a kind of content that in order to supply its own kind of content and not just reify the more obvious visual content that exists in the painted image. I guess I sort of want to signal that I know like the way you might start talking about it if it didn't have a title.
I know we have a lot.
No, it's, yeah, that's fine.
self-reflective color politics. I didn't talk about it in my talk because it would have kind of gone into a whole different area. But it's of course striking in Avery's work that you opt very consequently for grisaille, meaning a very limited palette. And if you look at the history of art and of the 20th century, say, and you wonder when was grisaille actually activated as a modus operandi, you find paintings such as Picasso's Guernica up to Richter's 18th October cycle on German terrorists, and you find, it always seemed to me that grisaille is opted for when, first of all, things get serious, and there's a kind of, serious political matter at stake, history painting is reactivated, and then you find a moment of grisaille in these artists' works. And I wondered about your decision to kind of activate this rhetorics, which is so loaded with a kind of ambition, to produce something that historically matters in this series. And in Dana's case, what struck me is that there's really willingness to embrace, very bright colors at time, and to kind of use them as a way. I think Diderot said that already, that color is the place in painting where a kind of sense of vitality gets produced. And this is, of course, because color and pigments are somewhat, coming from the earth and indicate some liveliness or something, like life. So you seem to completely go for, the kind of potential of color, and I wanted to know why and how you operate with this kind of vocabulary, whereas Avery opted for this grisaille tradition, which implies specific connotations.
I also have the understanding that grisaille was used for illustrating like sculpture. So
The Renaissance, yeah.
Yeah.
I was only looking at the 20th century. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I think because for me it was like I wanted to define the space really clearly, and I didn't think color would allow me to do it. And I don't really feel like I have a propensity for color. So I just didn't pursue it. I just knew that I could like effectively achieve what I needed to without it. And I've like flitted with ideas of color, but then it would, I think I would only do like I just don't know how to use it. Like I don't know what it would do for me. So I just like haven't pursued it. I mean, I'm sure that at some point it will like occur to me that like there is some like meaning that I can like produce with color, but now it just, or like as a, like the past year or two, just hasn't felt a necessity.
Yeah, it's interesting that how that works. Like for a long time when I was a student, I was trying to make things without color, and because at that time it just seemed like that was the way to make paintings that were kind of taken seriously or something. Like there's like Luke Toyman's, or I was actually trying to make paintings that looked photographic even though I wasn't using photographs, because it was a kind of attitude about the painting. And then I think there was a moment after that, I just thought it was something that I wasn't using. I was using paint as a material, and I always thought that color was somehow just attached to this material that came out of the tube. That's blue, But then I started thinking about it as a potential for expressive possibility, and also for it to be kind of gross, maybe, like that it was like something where you didn't, like it was annoying, to see something very like loud or garish or something. But then actually, I mean, I could say these things, these reasons, but it's actually another reason why I use color is sort of similar to the reason why you say use black and white, is I actually felt like it could do something in paintings like that. I actually enjoyed using color in a way that you say like, I actually, this works for me, you know, it works for what I want to be doing. So it's like, I think the thing that I was liking about color is that it spatially, how it could work, you could kind of make or break space with it, but also it felt bodily, like kind of physical, like certain purples could feel really cold or like recede in space, or they, you know, yellows could look really sick, and so there's also kind of a way to begin to describe the subject for me. And as a, you know, on the topic of liveliness, I think it's something that I've sort of felt uncomfortable about, I think, as time went on, because I think that people kind of have this feeling about the paintings, like, oh, they're so extroverted, you know, and that they're just so loud, like, and so it's something that I kind of wrestled with for a while, but then I you know, I realize now it's just something that I think it actually does have a real potential to make meaning, and I actually really enjoy color. I think it's really difficult using color for me sometimes. It's, as I just said, it was easier, but I just, but I think it's difficult to talk about color. That's for sure. I think people think you're like a kid or like really naive or something.
Yeah, I mean, I liked one of my favorite, and I tell a lot of people about this, but one of my favorite bodies of work, like contemporary painting, is Albert Uhlen's black and white computer paintings. Like, I think they're like radical in ways that I can't even begin to tell you why. And when I saw them, it wasn't like giving up anything, like everything that needed to be there was there, but it did it without color. And yet I saw them before I was making these paintings, and I think I really internalized that. Yeah.
That's it. Just if I may comment on this, because that's really interesting. I of course, when I saw your paintings, I thought of Albert's computer paintings as well, but I thought about them as being very different, because Albert Uhlen's computer paintings are all about, first of all, using the most stupid graphic program, use it in a also deliberately amateurish fashion, and then, you know, correcting or continuing the lines by hand, and in a way having painting saying the last word and winning over digital culture, which is not the case in your work. So his works seem to make a tongue-in-cheek paragone where painting wins and has the last word. And I don't really see that happening in your work, which is much more accepting or surrendering to its digital foundation.
Where does digital culture win in different work?
Well, I wouldn't say it wins, but I would say that there is not an attempt to, you know, to take the brushstroke and to kind of correct or continue the lines by hand, which is a metaphorical way of saying the brushstrokes has the last word. I mean, this is at least how I always read his computer paintings. Also, it's a joke, of course, about these kind of paragone-type rivalries between the different art forms.
Yeah, no, and I thought he was like making a one-liner with the Corel Paint application that he used to produce images on the computer. Like, I just thought it was such a sophisticated way of working, and I actually asked him about that, and he said it wasn't intended as a one-liner. Like, I think he just sort of went for it and didn't think of it in those ways, but
This is something, if they are computer printouts, this is something that, I mean, when you say like, where does, this question is like, when it does become a painting, it actually does have this kind of surface. You don't just stop at something. And also there's something of a different kind of physicality to them. When you're dealing with images, they don't really have a size. know what I mean? It could be any size on the computer or whatever. It could be blown up really big or whatever. But I think the way that you use images, they're super physical. Like you walk in and you see that woman's head, and it's like this giant head, you know. And they do feel like they're made. Like they're made. Like you look at them, you're like, oh my God, it took a lot of tape, you know. Like how the hell did she tape all of that, you know? And they're the kind of, you know, even though the SketchUp seems very de-skilled and everything, the way the paintings are made, they actually have like this kind of very, yeah, there is, but it's also, and I don't mean like boring labor, but you know what I mean. But they're really constructed, and I like how you're talking about them as building. That you're kind of actually building these things. But yeah, I think that there's something also about the surface, and the surface changed. I think with your paintings over time, like they really have like a beauty to them, a kind of velvet beauty surface, which I don't know. The thing about I don't have this very well formulated in my head, so I'm just going to talk about it. It's really interesting. But the idea, like this idea of the brush stroke, like I think the idea of the artist has changed, or the idea of an author is such an old idea of like what this means, and I think that it really to me feels like everything is of course different, like the way that people make things, but I don't think that this idea that one signifies an author more than the other, I think, whether the hand's involved or not, I think it to me doesn't seem valid anymore. Like it just doesn't seem like a valid point to me. So I don't mean valid in terms of the things that are being made, but as a position, like, oh, this is more subjective because it's trippy or something. But I think that it's like I don't know. But it's also, I think, the idea of when you look at a painting, like there's a potential that you don't always think about the author who made it. You kind of, I mean, you never forget. But I think there's a moment where you can actually say, oh, this thing is like has a real thing in the room, or has this, you can get involved with the object too.
In relation to what you just said, do you, as a viewer, take in like Corey Archangel's color field paintings and feel them to be like a subjective painting, like by the hand of the artist?
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah.
So do you get, what kind of response do you get? Do you get?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think maybe there's a subjective idea to how they work. I mean, in the way the color works with those paintings, even though it is probably the color from the. Actually, that's a good question. Someone was talking about the computer recently. I heard someone talking about this idea of interactive, like everything is so interactive. That my friend was talking about that being actually interpassive, like everything is like really already set for you, and then you just kind of go along with the program or something. But I think maybe in his case, he actually does do things with something that is supposed to be already programmed. Like I haven't seen too much of his work recently, so I shouldn't talk that much about it.
I think the point of them is that like anyone can make them,
But not every.
It's more.
Not everybody can. I mean, I guess if you, it's just like decision. Everyone said so easy to say, oh, everybody can make this, but not everybody.
But that's his conceptual ploy, in a sense, because it's just a mathematical, programmatic, like in Photoshop. It's like if you click on this and you set to this setting and this number, you will
Right.
create the painting.
Right.
So I mean, in that sense, it's very different from what Avery does, because I mean, some people have said, why don't you just print it out?
Yeah.
And obviously something different happens between pressing print and her like going through this laborious process of spending 200 hours creating a painting.
Right, right. Yeah, actually, I'm sorry, I was not thinking of the right body of work.
We can also take questions from further away and have first change. Please.
I was wondering if the question of how these might live in reproduction is something that informs the way they're made, and something to think about in the studio.
I mean, I never think about doing anything with my sketches. I mean, it's just like the way that I produce a sketch. It's not, I mean, it's really not that different from like any other, I mean, there isn't really a lot of it. I mean, there is some information, but it's not like all of the decisions that I'm going to make in the painting are like clearly defined at all. It's just like a way for me to begin visualizing like idea and like kind of quickly.
Oh, well, I wasn't asking about the sketches. I was asking about like what we're looking at now and just kind of digital photographs of the paintings. Because it strikes me that it's easy to imagine looking at pictures of your paintings that you can see all the information. But I guess because of the scale, because the value system is a lot more nuanced than you think, there are a lot of, I looked at reproductions of this painting for like 2 months before I realized that everyone's knee had the same shape, whether they were moving or standing still. And that seemed like a really important part of the strangeness of the image, the strangeness of the way that people interact with their own bodies and have a kind of limited consciousness of their own bodies. And I didn't realize that until I saw it in person. So I don't know, but I was just wondering if like beyond scale, if there are like other strategies, if the second life of the work on the internet or in photographic form is something that you think about.
No.
Is it something that you find that thinks, or is it something you just don't leave away?
I mean, I always think it's sad that I can't see the art that I want to see, like whenever I want to see it, you know, like I'm probably going to have to wait years to see Albert Uhlen's computer paintings again. And to be honest, if I saw them again, I would just like to see them in a museum setting or something, and like, you know, like what museum in New York is going to do that? Yeah. I mean, this is like one of my sketches. I made this living theater performance, Paradise Now. I produced this model of them doing a performance. It's Jack Smith. It's the Turkish bath again. Whoops. It kind of glitches at this moment. Okay. In the studio visit painting, this was like my first large painting on canvas, and it spent like an entire summer working on it, and then the paint started soaking through the gesso, so I had to like remake it. So this is the remade studio visit. And I thought one of Jim's, this is your student made this? I just thought this, you know, the projection of the solitary artist in the confines of their own studio. Also like sitting cross-legged, like the art, or I guess both of them cross-legged here.
Curious, actually, that would qualify as counter-network or something. I mean, it's clearly educational network, but it's solitary. Again, the icon cover thingy of Jim's student. Just picking up on that question of having some really peculiar example of like the obvious communicational device.
Talk about commodifying social relations.
Well, I also take great comfort in the fact that while that is on sale on the internet, nobody has ever bought it.
I'm gonna get it for my dad for the holidays.
Anyway, we don't have to do that on this. Yeah, there's a... I don't know. I'm not sure how to address that.
But yeah, I mean, with this painting, I had sort of like fantasies of actually having studio visits one day. So I produced this painting. But I mean, there's just so many historical precedents of like the artist like showing herself working in the studio. Just put a few here. And I guess I just wanted to update it. And in a way, making the painting was like exploring what that experience was supposed to be like. I mean, this is art that it's weird because it's art I have made, because I made it in the sketch, like I made this weird face or whatever, I appropriated this photo. I guess I kind of claim ownership to it in a weird way by painting it. And then this is where I guess I was like the secondary sexual characteristics should just be kind of like straightforward and dumb or something, and it would be kind of humorous. And then Saturday night, I thought this painting was terrible when I made it. There we go. Yeah, I was like thinking like Parisian bar scene, like they have those like ornamental windows and like giant cherubims of wine. But painting in the cafe. And of course the famous Manet painting. I mean, I literally thought like, okay, this is like almost like her perspective, the Saturday night painting. And I had like, I was like working in bars, so I had this like really crazy experience where I watched like 2 people drink 2 liters of wine and like 5 whiskeys in like a couple of hours, and the deterioration of this figure was like an embodiment of like the deterioration of 2 selves, like completely and totally, and it was like under my discretion, which was like really strange. Like in both of these instances, it's like as a bartender or a waitress, and then as a painter. Jewish artist and patron.
One last question. I was just thinking about the fact that you have so many paintings titled performance, and hinting iconographically to this kind of performative activity which we encounter in the kind of contemporary art scene of these days. And you were mentioning at the beginning of your talk also this painting performance conjuncture, and I was wondering if, why you decided to kind of relegate the performance to the kind of iconographic level instead of, opening up painting to performance, which has been done since, say, from Yves Klein to Jutta Köter's Lux Interior, where painting opens up to either the body of the muses, as in Klein's case, or to the body of the artist, as in Jutta Köter's case, which seems to, for me, Jutta Köter's Lux Interior is really a demonstration of how, in painting, the product and the person of its maker are somehow, interrelated. And then Jutta Köter decided to completely stop performances altogether, because she noticed how there was a tendency to, to get too fixated on her as a person. And this is maybe what is the advantage of painting, even though it strongly suggests, subjectivity. It can't be reduced to it, because it kind of has its own materiality, it stands in the way. And that's the difference to performance, which always will be,
which always will be the difference between the performance and the performer will always be, zero. The product is the person in performance, whereas in painting, the product hints to the person, somehow evokes the person, but can't be reduced to the person. And I thought maybe this could be a reason why you decided to just opt for paintings, treating this performative turn on an iconographic level, but not involving your body or other people's body in a performative way in relation to your paintings.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only effective combination of performance and painting that I can think of is Merlin Carpenter's Opening. I really wasn't conceptualizing things as I wanted to be a performer. Basically it was sort of modernism really feels at home in so many places, so that's where I began with trying to figure out imagery and visual language, and then I realized that the act of making it historical, my own relationship or attitudes to performance art that I hadn't seen historicized in painting was more interesting to me than furthering that activity. So I think it's a totally different activity that occurs with making a discrete painting than beginning to incorporate performance or saying that there was one. Because I could always change the claim, whether or not you buy it or not. Yeah. I think this is again this idea of gesture and its visibility that evokes the body and decision making, and then this feels performative. And these are to me easy comparisons to draw between the between performance and painting, and then I thought actually having the subject in a way be these performances would be more difficult, or it wasn't as well healed or something.
It's interesting thinking about painting's ability to speak in third person. Or I have a writer friend who's saying, "Oh, well, you're a painter," and you're always painting in first person. And I was thinking no, that's never the experience. But I think what it also is your paintings is that there's this, and also with maybe narrative painting, is that there's this, or representations, and there's that potential that you're dealing with the subject, but it's kind of in this you're depicting something that isn't supposed to really belong as a subject for painting, and also in a kind of way where you don't necessarily always believe the subject to be real, so if painting of a sculpture is somehow it promises it's a real thing or a real happening or a real thing, but it's always kind of in this illusion of it's not that, it's a representation of that. And so I think it's interesting the way that you use these things and that idea of I don't know, how the idea of it being, whether it's you or I don't know, maybe it's a distancing, as Isabel was saying, a kind of way to distance.
I think another thing though is painting is this time machine that doesn't want to accept new material, or at least it has this feeling for me. So I'm making paintings of things that happened in the 60s or the 80s or whatever, and it kind of feels appropriate now to do it, and it's been dragged through history a bit and has been digested already. Whereas because I was I kind of want to reference technology sometimes, people are recording videos and using their phone or something, and it's this tricky thing where it's you need to negotiate what you've seen and what you haven't seen, and when it's appropriate and powerful and potentially radical or interesting to begin to incorporate it and acknowledge it there in the space of the painting. So sometimes it's not Richard Prince printing Instagram is not enough is done to it. It's just one-to-one. It feels too soon to do that kind of gesture towards that social media outlet. Aside from like other problems that we have, or that I have with it, but yeah. So.
What about when Francis Stark does it?
I don't like find a lot of value in that project of hers either. I mean, you know, I like her Instagram account, you know, like I like looking at like what she does with it and whatever. I don't think she needs to like turn it into an object though. Like I don't think it gains anything from being like printed out and put on a wall. Like there's no translation. I mean, like art is like it's like a digestive process. It goes through filters, but for me, this like filter of like commodifying it for like a gallery setting like doesn't really do anything.
Maybe that's the moment to move to a little more communal and smaller circles. I don't want to cut it off. You know, I hate cutting anybody off. You're approaching a spectacular 70 minutes over time, and I think it's probably a good idea to just have the conversation in a little bit kind of a more closer scenario than this, if you're okay with it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, and Avery and Dana for coming.